If you had to choose one weapon to represent Rome, most people would picture the gladius. Not the long, elegant swords of medieval knights, not massive axes or exotic blades. A short sword, simple, brutal, and almost unimpressive until you understand what it was built to do. And that's where the myth begins. Because the gladius is often called the deadliest weapon in military history. That's a huge claim. If you measure deadliest by raw body count across all eras, it collapses instantly. Spears, arrows, and later gunpowder weapons changed the scale of killing far beyond anything a short sword could achieve. So the real question is different. How did a compact blade become a symbol of conquest? The answer is that the gladius wasn't designed to make one warrior look heroic. It was designed to make a line of men unstoppable. Rome's armies did not win because they were better duelists. They won because they fought as a disciplined system, and the gladius was engineered to thrive inside that system. Ancient battles were not cinematic sword duels. They were crowded collisions of bodies and shields where space vanished quickly. In that crush, long blades become clumsy. Wide swings become risky. The battlefield punishes anything that needs room. The gladius is the opposite of needing room. It thrives in tight spaces. It thrives behind a shield. It thrives when you are shoulder to shoulder and you cannot swing dramatically. It was built to stab. Fast, controlled thrusts delivered from behind the scutum, the large Roman shield that turns individual soldiers into a moving wall. This is what makes the gladius feel ruthless. It reduces violence to efficiency. A Roman soldier could hide most of his body behind the shield and still strike through small openings. He didn't have to step out for a heroic slash. He could stay protected and keep stabbing. A weapon is never just an object. It's a relationship between design and doctrine. A spear in a disciplined phalanx is not the same as a spear in an untrained crowd. The gladius in one man's hand is not the gladius in a Roman legion. In a legion, the gladius is not the weapon. It is the final step in a sequence. First, pila, heavy javelins, disrupt enemy shields and momentum. Then, the shield wall absorbs impact. Then the line advances, compressing the enemy into tighter and tighter space. And then, the gladius finishes the fight, using short thrusts in an environment where the enemy can barely swing, barely maneuver, barely breathe. That is why Rome's enemies described Roman fighting as relentless. Not because each legionary was a genius, because the formation made individual skill less important than collective rhythm. The gladius was chosen because it matched that rhythm perfectly. It was also practical. Easier to carry on long marches, faster to draw in tight conditions, more controllable in chaos, sturdier when used for thrusting. Rome's genius was often less about inventing from nothing and more about selecting what worked, standardizing it, and training an entire military culture around it. And gladius wasn't one fixed design forever. Different variants existed across time, changing slightly in shape and length, but the core idea remained a compact blade optimized for close combat in formation rather than dueling showmanship. If you place a gladius beside many famous swords, it looks almost plain. That's because it wasn't designed to impress from a distance. It was designed to function in the worst conditions of close combat, cramped space, shield collisions, panic, and pressure. The key question is, why short? Because short blades dominate in formation fighting. A larger force wants open space. Open space gives room to swing and maneuver. But a legion tries to remove space. When shields lock and lines collide, the fight becomes a narrow corridor of bodies. In that corridor, a long sword becomes awkward. It needs arcs and room. A short sword doesn't. The gladius allows a soldier to stay protected behind the scutum and still strike effectively. The scutum covers most of the body. It allows safe closing distance, but a shield alone cannot win. It needs a blade that can work from behind cover. The gladius is that blade. Its short reach is not weakness. its compatibility with protection. This is why the point matters so much. In a crush, a thrust only needs a gap, and gaps appear constantly. Between shield edges, under arms, in the brief moment someone turns or stumbles. A thrust travels a shorter path than a slash, so it can be delivered faster, with more control, and with less exposure. That's why Roman training emphasized thrusting. It's the technique most compatible with disciplined formation combat. The Romans likely adopted early forms of the gladius through experience and adaptation, with strong tradition linking it to Iberian influence, often called Hispaniensis for early types. Whatever the exact origin details, the broader pattern is clear. Rome took what worked in real war, then standardized it. Standardization plus training equals repeatable success. The gladius also needed to be durable. Thrusting concentrates force. A flimsy blade bends. A stiff blade survives. And in a legionary's life, the sword is carried through rain, dust, and long marches. Practical durability matters more than elegance. The gladius is a soldier's tool, but the real genius is the pairing scutum plus gladius. A large shield changes geometry. It denies the enemy clean angles. It forces close contact. Once contact is tight, the gladius becomes lethal because it operates without space. Many weapons look great in open ground. The gladius looks great when open ground disappears. If the gladius were just a sword, it would be dangerous. It becomes legendary only inside Rome's system. Rome fought like a moving machine, and the gladius was the machine's final gear. The sequence begins with disruption. Pila volleys strike enemy shields, ruin momentum, and break confidence. Shields are not just protection, they are morale. When shields fail, morale leaks. Then comes absorption. The Roman line locks behind the scutum. The shield wall becomes a surface that takes impact without dissolving. It transforms thousands of men into one structure. Enemy attacks crash into that structure and waste energy. Then comes compression. The Roman line advances step by step, denying space. Space is what makes most weapons effective. As space vanishes, enemies lose the ability to swing wide or maneuver. Rear ranks push forward, front ranks are trapped, and the formation begins to behave like a crowd. This is where the gladius dominates. In the crush, the gladius doesn't need space. It needs openings, and openings appear everywhere when people are compressed. A legionary can thrust from behind the shield edge, fast, controlled, protected. He doesn't expose his body for a big swing. He stays part of the wall and still kills. That is why Roman fighting feels relentless. The line pushes, the enemy compresses, and short thrusts keep landing from behind the shields. The enemy can't easily strike back because the Roman wall hides bodies and denies angles. Training makes this repeatable. Rome trained soldiers to survive through the group, not alone. That's the psychological revolution. When men trust formation, they fight calmly. Calmness increases accuracy. Accuracy increases killing. And once morale cracks, retreat begins. The gladius becomes a morale weapon because it punishes disorder. When an enemy breaks and tries to pull back through congestion, panic spreads. Once panic spreads, the battle becomes rout. Most casualties in ancient war happen in rout, not in the equal clash. So the gladius isn't deadly in isolation. It is deadly because it sits at the end of a system that manufactures collapse. Rome's cohesion is the true killer, and the gladius is the perfect blade for cohesion. The myth says Rome conquered because it had the perfect sword. The truth is harsher. Rome conquered because it built a disciplined system where a short sword became inevitable. If you define deadliest as total historical body count, the gladius cannot compete with later technologies or even with ancient mass weapons like spears and arrows. If you define deadliest as dueling dominance, the answer depends on terrain, armor, and skill. In open space, longer weapons can control distance. But if you define deadliest in the environment the gladius was made for, close combat in disciplined formation, then the gladius is one of the most lethal weapons ever designed. It is short enough to control, stiff enough to thrust, pointed enough to exploit gaps, fast enough to strike without exposing the body, and paired with a shield wall that denies the enemy space. That pairing is why Rome's enemies feared the crush. They could bring longer swords and fiercer individuals,